Welcome to the second lesson in our introductory unit for AP Government. What we're going to be looking at today is we're going to be looking at the steps to the Declaration of Independence, kind of looking at what the Declaration of Independence looks like and what were some of the things that got us to the point of being able to write that. So when we look at the idea of what the Declaration of Independence is and kind of where a lot of those things are rooted, it's really rooted hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before the actual writing of that document in 1776. Some of the most important stepping stones to the Declaration were documents that began to limit the power of government in England or began to establish a sense of self-rule in the colonies. So when we look at really the first concept here is the Magna Carta. This document was passed in 1215, and it forced King John to give up part of his power in order to remain King of England. Now, this really did have limited success, and it's something that had to be reissued a number of times before it really kind of took hold. But it's really one of the first times where you see the idea of the people within the system taking the initiative to be able to try and limit the absolute power of a monarchical force. When you start to look at the United States and kind of its infancy, we've got the Mayflower Compact in 1620, and this is hundreds and hundreds of years later. The Mayflower Compact is important because it is really the first governing document written by the colonists that attempt to organize the concept of self-rule. And really what they do, it's a very short document. It's only maybe a paragraph or two in length. But really what they try and do here is they try to establish some policies and some ways to be able to figure out how they would govern themselves due to the fact that they were so far away from the rule of their mother country. When we continue to look at different things that have a major impact, you've got the Petition of Right, which is written in 1628, which is written in England. And this was the English document that set out specific rights for citizens. At first, these rights were only for the nobility, but eventually extended to the right of the common people. And these rights are further extended by the English Bill of Rights in 1689. And when you look at the Petition of Right and you look at the English Bill of Rights, a lot of the things that are within these documents are things that you see echoed within our own Bill of Rights. The idea of freedom of speech, the idea of an independent judiciary, all of these different things are things that we find within our own governmental system. You also have the Albany Plan of Union, which is in 1754. This was a failed proposal to unify the 13 colonies in mutual defense during the French and Indian War. This is important because it signifies one of the first movements to unify the colonies as a cohesive body. And here we are about 20 years before the beginning of the Revolutionary War. Another one of the major catalysts to the concept of the Declaration of Independence is the time period that we know as the Enlightenment. Now, the Enlightenment takes place after the Renaissance. So we know the Renaissance is this major explosion of thought, it's this major explosion of art, it's us coming out of the Dark Ages and really starting to buy into a lot of different things. But even with the Renaissance, it's very much focused on the concept of religion and authority. As we move into the Enlightenment, you have a lot of people that start to begin to question these institutions. They start to question whether or not this authority is vested in the correct places. All right, so you've got people like Montesquieu and John Locke and Thomas Hobbes and individuals like that are all starting to meet in what are called salons. They would meet in really rich people's drawing rooms in which they would have tea and they would discuss the way that the world should be. And they started to really challenge the thoughts that had preceded them in previous centuries. So when we look at a guy like this is John Locke. John Locke is an unbelievably influential individual when it comes to the process of developing many of the ideas of the Enlightenment. John Locke is this idea, and he's the father of this idea known as popular sovereignty. And popular sovereignty is the belief that the power of the government is derived from the consent of the people. And this is found within the Second Treatise of Civil Government. So this idea of popular sovereignty, sovereignty being freedom, the independence to make their own decisions. Popular being the idea that it is the majority, or it is the people that are the ones that have that sovereignty, that freedom to be able to make these choices. Locke argues that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are natural rights that belong to us all, which is something that is echoed under Thomas Jefferson when you see the idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or the life, liberty, and property that it is something that all of us have, that we are all guaranteed these things. Now, the way that Locke explains it is that he says that we are all born into a natural state of freedom, that we all have absolute freedom when mankind first came into existence. But when we go back to that idea of the force theory of government, in which the biggest, baddest guy on the block could come through and destroy you, you needed to figure out a way to be able to protect your things and yourself. Because really, when you look at it, laws and things like that we put into place are largely in order to be able to do those things, to be able to protect ourselves and to be able to protect our stuff. So the idea behind this is that the better protection comes in numbers, that we start to align ourselves with other individuals. Well, naturally, when you begin to align yourself with other individuals, everything that you want is no longer the focus. You also then have to begin to look at the needs of the other people within your union. Okay? This is where we begin to give up our freedom. But we give those freedoms up voluntarily in order to be able to protect our things and our people, our individual self. All right? So Locke's idea is that we enter into a social contract with one another, that we provide power to certain individuals in order to be able to maintain that protection, and to be able to maintain the things that we want as individuals. Okay? Locke states that because that contract, and within a contract, everybody is supposed to benefit from that. The people in power benefit because they have power. The people below that power benefit because they are protected. The idea behind this is that if the government no longer does the things that the people need them to do in order to feel protected, in order to feel whole, that it is not only the right of the citizenry to get rid of that government, it is the responsibility of that citizenry to get rid of that government. This therefore puts the authority of the government in the hands of the people. So the idea of the consent of the governed. All right. This is at the forefront and the center of the idea of the Declaration of Independence, and it is at the center of the Constitution. Because when you look at the beginning of the Constitution, it begins with the words, "We the people," which is supposed to make us the center of everything that happens within our government. This is Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet in 1776 entitled Common Sense. Now, the things that Thomas Paine talks about in Common Sense are not revolutionary ideas. Most of the ideas that he expresses within Common Sense aren't really new at all. But it is the timing of the document that is really the important thing, because Common Sense becomes a huge catalyst, and it becomes a huge motivation that pulls a lot of people into support of separation from Great Britain. In Common Sense, Thomas Paine details the ridiculousness of how a tiny island can rule an entire people. And he also makes the argument that if God is supposed to be infallible, then, and if God is the one that is responsible for choosing leaders within our monarchies, then by extension, every monarch that rules should be a good monarch, because God is the one that chose them. And since God can't make mistakes, and because there have been bad kings, it is reasonable to state that God did not choose that ruler, and therefore the idea of the divine right theory is inherently flawed. And this really catches a lot of people's attention and forces them to kind of question whether or not loyalty to the king really truly makes sense. So what's the impact? The impact on the revolutionary generation of America is incalculable, because it is the ideas that are put forth in Common Sense, the idea of popular sovereignty, the idea of the social contract theory, the idea that it is the people that should have the right to dictate the things that happen within the government, permeate the Declaration of Independence and the American Constitution in a very, very deep way. And when you read the readings of our founding fathers, and you look at the things that these individuals put in place, they very much owe a great deal of gratitude to individuals like John Locke, who provided them with the forethought to think that we had the capability of ruling ourselves. So as we move into this push to be able to get towards independence in the United States, the push to writing the Declaration of Independence, while there were quite a few people within the Continental Congress that were pushing for independence, mainly Massachusetts. You've got Sam Adams, John Adams, those individuals that were very pressing hard for the idea of independence. the vast majority of colonies in 1774 still felt that we could reconcile ourselves with Great Britain, that they felt that we could still maintain our status as loyal British citizens. So in the First Continental Congress, it is established that we will try and offer a peace settlement that we refer to as the Olive Branch Petition. The olive branch is a sign of peace, and we send this olive branch petition to King George and ask him to allow us to continue this experiment of self-rule, to allow us to be able to work better with him, but still maintain the relationship that we currently have. King George III refused to even hear the olive branch petition, and this pushed the colonies even closer to the Declaration of Independence. So after the failure of the Olive Branch Petition, a Second Continental Congress was convened. In this Continental Congress, Thomas Jefferson was called upon to draft the Declaration of Independence that would enumerate the reasons why separation from Great Britain was warranted. And when you look at the structure of the Declaration of Independence, you have an introduction, which kind of talks about why the document is being written. And then the main body of the Declaration of Independence is really a list of grievances, a list of reasons why, honestly, why Thomas Jefferson thought that Great Britain was a horrible country, and it was the different things that justified why we would separate from them. And then the last portion of the document is the formal declaration stating that we have now formally separated ourselves. Thomas Jefferson really drew heavily upon his own previous writings and on the work of John Locke and individuals like that to be able to push the idea of popular sovereignty and the social contract theory. And as we stated, here is the kind of the structure of what the Declaration of Independence looks like. So we formally vote for independence on July 2nd, 1776. And there were a lot of our founding fathers, especially John Adams, that went home and stated that they felt that the July 2nd would be the day that we would celebrate for the rest of eternity with fireworks and festivities to look at our independence. July 2nd is the day that we pass the Lee Resolution, which is where our Congress officially decides to adopt the Declaration of Independence. The reason why we celebrate the Independence Day on July 4th is because that is the day that the Declaration was formally announced to the citizenry, and it is the day that the final version of the Declaration of Independence was formally signed by John Hancock, who was the president of the Continental Congress.